honourable member for Surrey North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's an honour to speak on behalf of my constituents from Surrey North. Mr. Speaker, I want to start out by stating what the Minister of Defence has pointed out in his speech. He pointed out that this bill was long overdue. In fact, he pointed out that the bill should have been addressed back before they got into the government. And it's the slow pace of this government in addressing the criminal justice system in our military that has been dragging its feet over a number of years. Having said that, I know ministers had a rough run in the last couple of years, whether it's the military procurement, whether it's recently the ministers had a rough run in regards to the pay difference in Afghanistan. But, Mr. Speaker, I would like to point out this is a small step in the right direction, and I would have to give the minister a small step in the right direction, but more could have been done in regards to criminal justice system, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as the minister pointed out, this bill was introduced in this House back in October of 2011, and it was basically an act to amend the National Defence Act and to make consequential amendments to other acts, basically strengthening military justice in the Defence of Canada Act. Bill C-15 amends the National Defence Act to strengthen military justice following the 2003 report of the former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, the Right Honourable Antonio Lamar, and the May 2009 report of the Standing Committee on Legal and Constitutional Affairs. Again, Mr. Speaker, Justice Lamar had made recommendations back in 2003, and it's only now the government is getting around to addressing our broken military justice system. Among other things, this bill provides greater flexibility in the sentencing process, provides for additional sentencing options, including absolute discharges, intermittent sentences, restitution, and it modifies the composition of court-martial panel according to the ranks of accused persons, modifies the limitations among many other things, Mr. Speaker. Bill C-15 is a step in the right direction. However, the government should have done more, Mr. Speaker. The Bill C-15 suffers for basically Conservatives' slow-footed response to the Lesage report, which was not incorporated into the bill, as well as the lack of wall-to-wall review of the sections of the National Defence Act pertaining to the military justice. Mr. Speaker, Bill C-15 falls far short of key issues when it comes to reforming the summary trial system, reforming the grievance system, and strengthening the Military Complaints Commission. We are letting our soldiers down, Mr. Speaker, with this unnecessary slow pace of change. The NDP will continue to lay the groundwork for a larger review of the need for the modernization and civilization of military legal system and the implementation of greater civilian oversight. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud of my colleagues on the Defence Committee who forced this government to make some amendments to the bill. As you may recall, I was also spoke on in the second reading of this bill, and I spoke about some of the shortcomings of this bill that we like to strengthen. One of the things that we wanted to do was it was in regards to the having criminal records for the military personnel, and we weren't comfortable with that particular clause in the bill. And the NDP, my colleagues on the Defence Committee, forced the Conservatives to accept an amendment which basically is forcing changes so that over 90% of disciplinary offences will not result in criminal records. We will support Bill C-15 at this point. The NDP is proud to vote for this significant, tangible result that we have been vocally and legislatively in support of for the members of our Canadian military forces. Our efforts have established one more important reform in building fair military justice, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's important that the amendments that were proposed, the amendments that were offered by the NDP, the Conservatives accepted those. That is one of the reasons. It's a small step, one aspect of the bill. It's not the entire bill. We would like to see more changes to the military justice system so that we can have a robust justice system in the military. This is a small step in the right direction. One of the key elements was the criminal records for the military personnel. So 90% of the military personnel will not have a criminal record after going through this. So this was an important first step, Mr. Speaker. Members of the Canadian Forces are held to extremely high standard of discipline, and they in turn deserve a judicial system that is held to a comparable standard. The NDP will support Bill C-15's improvement because Bill C-15 is a step in the right direction. However, the government should have done more. Mr. Speaker, the government voted against several prudent NDP amendments at committee that asked to fully incorporate Justice Lamar's 2003 recommendations and some of Justice Lesage's 2011 amendments. They even voted against a clarification to the letter of the law in Clause 35 as proposed by Justice Lesage. This has resulted in a failure to strengthen the proper safeguards for independent in the grievance system, military police, or judicial elements of military justice system. Mr. Speaker, the NDP is calling on the Conservatives to approach the military justice system in a holistic way. What the Conservatives have been doing is they've been taking a piecemeal approach, a little bit at a time. I think the Military Defense Act is a relic. I think we need to look at it in a detailed wall-to-wall to reform and bring our criminal justice system in the military to the 21st century. And Conservatives had a chance, Mr. Speaker. They had a chance to do this. They've had a chance for the last 6 or 7 years to do this. However, they haven't done that. They have taken a very piecemeal approach to the military justice, Mr. Speaker. And I think we're doing injustice to the men and women that serve this country proudly. I think we can do much better. We can support our men and women by framing, making sure that they receive justice when they do need justice, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, going back to the recommendations in the Lamar, Justice Lamar's recommendations. In 2003, the Right Honourable Lamar, former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, presented his report on the independent review of the National Defence Act. The Lamar report contained 88 recommendations pertaining to military justice. The Military Police Complaints Commission, the grievance process, and the Provost Marshal. Bill C-15 is a legislative response to these recommendations, Mr. Speaker. Former Chief of Supreme Court, the Right Honourable Lesage, provided an additional review of certain sections of the National Defence Act that was handed to the government in December 2011. And the Minister of Justice, Minister of National Defence, tabled the report in June 2012. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives took over a year to table that report. They had it sitting on the minister's desk, and he didn't act at all. They've had a number of years to bring forward legislation so we can reform the military justice system. Yet, I've mentioned before, they're foot dragging on the issue of reforming our justice system. And even though we are supporting this particular bill, one of our major concerns, I think, is this one little step in the right direction. However, there are a number of recommendations from the Lesage report and Justice Right Honourable Lamar recommendations that are not part of Bill C-15. And that is where the government needs to work on. They need to take on a wall-to-wall review of the Military Defense Act, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in fact, the Conservatives have voted against amendments attempting to incorporate several of Lesage's recommendations into the bill. Bill C-15 has appeared in earlier forms. Just going back to the history of it, first Bill C-7 and C-45 died on the order paper due to the prorogation in 2007 and an election in 2008. And in July 2008, Bill C-60 came into force, simplifying the structure of the court-martials and establishing a method for choosing the type of court-martial more closely aligned with civilian system. In 2009, the Standing Committee, the Senate Standing Committee on Legal and Constitutional Affairs considered Bill C-60 and provided 9 amendments to the National Defense Act. In 2010, Bill C-41 was introduced to respond to the 2000 Lemire report and the Lesage report. It outlined provisions related to the military justice, such as sentencing, reform, military justice committees, summary trials, court-martial panels, the provost marshal, and limited provisions related to grievance and military complaints process. In essence, Mr. Speaker, Bill C-15 is similar to the version of Bill C-41 that came out of committee in the previous Parliament. The amendments carried over included court-martial, military justice judges, security of tenure, appointment, and age, basically. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, there were other important amendments in C-41 that were proposed at the amendment stage, and they were incorporated at the end of the last parliamentary session. However, those amendments that were introduced in the previous bill were not taken into consideration in Bill C-15. And that's unfortunate, because here we had a bill that went through the process. We had heard in the committee, we heard from witnesses, we heard experts, judges, many people associated with the military justice system testify, and we had reached a compromise. We reached across to different parties, the Conservatives, the Liberals, the NDP worked together to bring about amendments that will serve our military justice system in a way that is fair to them. The process was, you know, in the committees, you get amendments, you get input from key witnesses, and when that process takes place, you hear from all sides. And the committee recommended a number of amendments that would have helped make this system better. However, Mr. Speaker, and we've seen this with the Conservatives. However, what they've taken is, in Bill C-15, they failed to incorporate those very amendments that were agreed upon in the last parliamentary session. And that's very unfortunate, Mr. Speaker, because the amendments that were coming out of the last parliamentary session were consensus from all 3 parties. They reached consensus, and they were going through those. However, the Conservatives, you know, they are not listening, or they don't want to incorporate those very amendments that would have formed a more consensus towards how we can take a larger leap in reforming our military justice system. Yet they backtracked a little bit from that, but yet this is a smaller step in the right direction. Mr. Speaker, there was one such amendment is a compromise that NDP fought for from Bill C-41 to Clause 75. At the NDP prompting and in recognition of amendments absent, the Conservatives introduced this amendment back into Clause 75 of Bill C-15. While this compromise that the NDP fought hard for in Bill C-41 in the House for Bill C-15 is an improvement on the current legislation, it does not go far enough in improving the summary trial process for our Canadian forces. It does not guarantee that a person who is convicted of an offense during a summary trial is not unfairly subject to criminal record. Furthermore, the Conservatives voted against prudent NDP amendments that would have ensured that proper legislative mechanisms are placed to apply Clause 75 retroactively. There were a number of other improvements that we brought forward in the committee, Mr. Speaker, and I believe that's what committees are for. That's where you bring in improvements to the bills, where we can make the laws that we make in this place a better that serves Canadians in a better way. Yet the Conservatives voted down every single one of those amendments, Mr. Speaker, and some of the amendments we wanted to make to improve. You know, I keep going back to this. This is a small step in the right direction. I think we could have taken a bigger step. In fact, I believe we need a wall-to-wall review of the National Defense Act, that we can bring this act into the 21st century. Mr. Speaker, yet the Conservatives didn't even want to take a little bigger step. Here are some of the amendments that we had proposed in the committee, Mr. Speaker. One of the amendments that was voted down by the Conservatives was giving the Chief Defense Staff the financial authority to compensate CF members in the grievance process. It was Amendment Clause 6 in Bill C-41, responding directly to Justice Lamar's recommendations. Changes to the composition of grievance committee to include 60% civilian membership and exclude active duty Canadian Forces members was amended Clause 11 in Bill C-41, thus enhancing the independence of the board. I mean, these are common sense amendments that would improve the military justice system, Mr. Speaker. And these were amendments were previously, in the previous Parliament, were approved by the committee. Yet the Conservatives failed to bring them into this Bill C-15. Again, you know, this is a small step in the right direction. They could have done more. They could have taken some of the testimony that we heard in this committee, in Bill C-15, and also the committee that was the previous Parliament. And that committee had agreed on these amendments. Yet the Conservatives took those amendments out. Mr. Speaker, that is puzzling to me. You know, in one year they agreed to this, and next year, after a new Parliament, they're gone back on their word, Mr. Speaker. And that's failing the very people that serve this country, Mr. Speaker. Another amendment that we introduced, Mr. Speaker, is a provision ensuring that a person who is convicted of an offense during a summary trial is not unfairly subjected to criminal record. Amended Clause 75 in Bill C-41, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you know, these were very common sense, and I can go on. I know I have very limited time. I can go on and on about some of the changes that we had proposed and some of the things that we like to see in our approach to how we reform the military justice system. Mr. Speaker, again, I want to go back to what I started out with. You know, the Minister of Defense has had bad news over the last 2 years. You know, he's bungled the F-35 procurement, and it's a mess. It's a fiasco. You can use a number of other adjectives to describe that. And we've seen a number of other scandals in the Ministry of Defense. We've seen recently, you know, a differential in pay in Afghanistan. You know, the Minister of Defense could use a little bit of good news, and I would say this is a very little good news that is going to reform the military justice system. However, what we are calling for is a review of the entire wall-to-wall review of the National Defense Act, so that we can reform the criminal justice system in the military, so that we can provide the support, the encouragement, the resources to our military personnel who serve us very proudly. And Mr. Speaker, I stand in this House. One of the reasons that I have a free voice to speak up in this House, to be able to speak on behalf of my citizens, constituents from Surrey North, is because of the very sacrifices that the people the men and women in the military has made. And the least this House could do is provide them with a modern National Defense Act so they can carry on their job, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.